I'm so excited because I've been wanting Shaka Senghor, who's the author of this best-selling book, in the studio for a while, and he's finally here. But before we start the interview, I want to share a story about how we met at the White House for a panel on criminal justice reform, which I had never been part of in my whole life.
Right. You did a great job, though.
You think so?
Yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I was anyway. I learned a lot that day.
Yeah.
Like from that day, I feel like from that day to now, I have a wildly clearer understanding of some of the problems. Anyway, so I'm on a panel at the White House, and I asked Van Jones about what it's going to take to cut down incarceration, and this is what happened at the White House. This was my introduction to Shaka.
Our goal is to get 1 million people to sign a petition called the Justice Reform Now .org petition, in line with what Valerie Jarrett said, which is this is the year to do it. Justice reform now. Let's do it now. And we're proud to report, working with Michael Skolnick, we've been able to attract nearly 100 celebrities and well-known artists to sign on to that petition. So we're trying to give support to the people who are fighting for reform through Cut 50. But I'm actually not qualified to speak about it. I'm not. There is somebody who's qualified to speak about it. His name's Shaka Senghor. He did 19 years in prison. He did 7 years in solitary confinement. 7. People go completely insane after 90 days. He did 7 years. And somehow he got a letter in solitary confinement from his child who said, "Daddy, I know what you did, and I know that you're a murderer." And it so broke his heart to realize that for the rest of his life, his child would only see him in that way, that he completely turned his life around. And Shaka Senghor walked out of prison 5 years ago this summer. He is an MIT fellow. His TED Talk got 1.2 million views, one of the top 5 TED Talks of 2014, last year. He sat down for an interview with Oprah Winfrey. Oprah Winfrey talked to him for 2 hours. She wrote in her magazine just last month, it was not in the top 5 interviews she's ever had. She says in the top 5 conversations she's ever had with any human being. Now, she's had a few conversations. He just got a major book deal from Random House. Oprah just decided last week she's going to do a film about his life. He is one of the leaders of Cut 50, and he can't get in this building. Today, right now. And I feel like a fraud sitting up here, because I know if he were here, he would actually move you guys. And so, I know we're going to get him in, but right now he can't get in. I know that God's going to work a miracle and he's going to be able to be here. I know he's not going to leave this building humiliated. But this is what we do to people. Even those of us who are trying our best. And it's got to change. Shaka's a better person than I am. Valerie, when I quit this job, I was messed up for a year. And, I didn't have a good excuse because I got another job. He did 7 years of solitary confinement, and he's more sane than anybody in this room. So I'm praying for a miracle that he gets to come, and I'm praying for a miracle that all of us do what we have to do in this country to stop wasting genius and stop throwing people away.
Wow. I mean, wow. What does that feel like to see that? Have you seen it in its entirety like that?
No, I've saw like bits and pieces of it. Mm-hmm. It's deep. Like Van is like such a genuine person. Mm-hmm. Genuinely cares about the issue, and just seeing how emotionally he got, about the whole issue. Like it speaks volumes. I mean, that's what we're doing to people. Like we're literally throwing people away, and it's one of the biggest tragedies, in our country, especially when it comes to inner city kids who get caught up in the system. And once they try to get out and try to come home and do something positive, you run into so many roadblocks. And
it makes it impossible,
day,
right?
Yeah. That particular day was it was deep because we had just come from New York, trying to raise funds for the work that we're doing, and got to the White House, which I was invited to.
And what a high, right? That you're at the White House.
Like, we literally was running through streets because we was like running behind. We got misinformation. And so to get there and to run into that obstacle on a day where they're talking about criminal justice reform.
What happened outside? They just was like.
They was like, we changed our mind that you can't come in. That they ran a further check. And I mean, like, we were very transparent that I have a felony,
Mm-hmm.
And so I guess after the initial acceptance, somebody decided to change their mind, But I mean, the White House was very apologetic, and
you eventually got in.
Yeah.
So the crazy thing is, I'm there. I'm way out of my element. It's my first time even participating in anything on the topic.
Mm.
But I was moved by the whole day.
Mm.
So then there was a point where we all get to line up to meet the president. So now I'm like overwhelmed. I'm nervous. I'm about to meet the president. And I didn't know who you were, but you had gotten in now.
Yeah.
I didn't realize you were the man that he was speaking about. But for some reason, I just resonated to you because you seemed like the most normal person in the room to me. And so we just started, we were just talking about it's crazy. We're here in the White House. We were talking about how many young black people were in the room and how impressive that was. Yeah. And we were just like having regular conversation. And then in the middle of that, Shaka asked me, he said he had just got here. He was like, what's been the big highlight of the day? I was like, well, there was this moment with Van when he opened up about a gentleman who couldn't get in the White House. Yeah. And you were like, that was me. It was such a crazy moment.
But it was like, for me, like, what was really impressive was actually seeing you and Ludacris. Because I think this issue, more than anything, should be really at the top of our concerns for the hip hop community.
Yeah, I agree.
Because nobody's more impacted by it than us.
100%.
I'm a child of hip hop. I love the culture. I love rap on every level. The street, the griminess, the grit. But what I've found is that voice has been somewhat absent on this issue, and it's impacting us deeply. Like, when you go inside prison, that's hip hop culture that's being incarcerated at record numbers. So to come in and just see y'all, and I'm just like, not only do I respect y'all craft, but I respect y'all as human beings, and just the voice, the way that y'all been able to use y'all voice on really important issues, and I thank you for just like the outpouring of support. It's just been genuine and organic, and I appreciate that.
Thank you. It's, I was talking about you the other day. I know you saw on the podcast that I did.
Actually, yeah, one of my friends ended up texting it to me, and I was funny. Like, wow, like I got emotional. Like,
did you really?
Yeah, I was like,
even when I was on the radio telling your story, telling people to get your book, it touches me in such a real way, because I think your story, beyond that, it's a dope book.
Yeah, thank you.
And I always tell people, like, because I know a lot of people either that are locked up or know somebody who's locked up. I always say, send them this book.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying, or send it to their family members. Or I've been saying that to people, but. It's one thing when you meet somebody whose story you feel could actually shift something.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? So I feel that about your story, which is why it touches me so much, and why I'm so honored to even be able to share it with people.
Thank you so much. I mean, I think about when I began writing this book, I wrote it out of a responsibility. My responsibility is to my friends who I left behind. A lot of guys talk about
before prison. Oh, in prison.
A lot of guys talk about keeping it real, right? So I could have came out here and just got a job and moved on with my life, but I can't spend 2 decades with somebody and call them my friends and not give voice to their plight. Like, that's not real to me, And so this book is wrote out of that energy of, like, I watch people judge us all the time. I get judged every day in some way, shape, form, or fashion, and it's cool because I'm spiritually grounded enough to handle it. But our story is deeper than a 30-second clip on, lead news. We come from backgrounds of extreme abuse, extreme violence. And so I'm like, what's happening inside our prison system, we have to shed a light on that. And the only way you can solve a problem is be in close proximity to it. And I think that what Right My Wrongs does is bring you as close to the prison experience as possible without you actually getting arrested.
Yeah. And unfortunately, honestly, I think one of the things is that a lot of people who live this life, people who are inside, don't have the voice you have or the talent you have to be able to pen a story, voice a story, share a story. So it's like you're speaking on behalf of people who can't really speak for themselves. You know what I'm saying?
I mean, like when I did TED, it was the most stressful day of my life as a public speaker, because I realized I was speaking to the world, and I wasn't just speaking about myself. You know, it's over 2 million men and women incarcerated who don't have a voice. And so that's a great deal of responsibility, because not only am I representing them.
We're going to post a link for the TED Talk too. You guys should totally watch his TED Talk.
Yeah.
That's what set this whole like new wave of everything off, right?
Yeah, I mean, 'cause it was groundbreaking in the sense that it opened up the conversation in ways that wasn't comfortable for the American public. Because typically what happens is it's usually somebody who's been exonerated. It's usually somebody who has been, you know, got their sentences commuted by the president or something like that. Rarely, if ever, have you ever had a voice of somebody who authentically come from the street environment that admittedly has committed this, you know, a crime, a murder, but that's really talking about how do we turn things around, how do we create opportunities,
how did you even get
how
there?
do we
is the interesting, really interesting part of that.
Yeah.
I watched in Oprah Winfrey's season premiere of
Super Soul
Sundays was an interview with Shaka. One of the things too that touched me was like you were talking about the first time you had been shot. You were shot 3 times?
Yeah, 3 times, yeah.
3 times. So they take you to the hospital. You leave the hospital. They take you right back to the block you got shot on.
Right back in the hood.
There's no therapy. There's no conversation. There's no how do you deal with trauma? Because that's trauma.
It's
like
real,
you need somebody to talk to.
17 years old, right.
17 years old, just send you back to the same block you got shot up 3 times.
Yeah.
And that was probably the worst. That probably triggered all of the other things that happened.
Yeah, I mean, after that, I was never the same. You know what I mean? I had been selling drugs. I'd been in that culture for a while. And, you know, we had guns around. But from that point forward, like, I carried a gun everywhere, no matter what I was doing. I didn't care. I'm eating. I'm using the bathroom, sleeping, chilling with a lady. Like, it's a pistol, like, there, you know? Because I was left to grapple with this volatile cocktail of emotions. You're talking about fear, anger, anxiety, paranoia. And the thing is, there's no space for young black men to say, you know, I'm afraid because somebody almost killed me over nothing. And so this is the anger. When you see those stone cold face, the ice grill,
that's
that
what
comes
it
out of
is.
that.
But people think maybe the 17-year-old that you were from the exterior was probably super hard.
Yeah.
So people just assume, oh, he got shot. He going back to the block as part of his life, as part of what he does.
Right.
They don't even see the change and the shift that happened to you because nobody talked to you about it.
Yeah. And I mean, like in my family alone, 8 males have been shot. And it's the cycle. That's how the cycle of violence is, you know. And none of them, not one of them, like my nephew got shot like shortly after I came home. He was the passenger in the car where his friend got killed. And I remember when I went to the hospital, you know, I asked him like, how do you feel, you know? And he just had this look in his eyes like, you know, I almost died. You know, my friend died, but he couldn't verbalize that. And I know what it felt like because I've been shot, you know. I had another nephew who's currently in prison now because he retaliated after he got shot. And when I looked in his eyes, like he coded, like he almost died, you know, in the hospital. And I saw the change. Like my soft, cuddly nephew was no longer there, you know. And it just reminded me of the faces of the guys that's in prison and how we've fell asleep on our watch, you know, like we glorify a lot of stuff in the hood, you know, and it's, you know, and the thing is like,
it's almost like a badge, right?
It's like a badge, right? But people don't tell you about all the collateral consequences of that badge. You know, I don't know one person that's serving life right now that wouldn't cherish a moment of being free.
What would you have told that 17-year-old self?
Get help. Like find somebody who will really listen to you. You know, and that it doesn't make you a punk because you want to live. Like it takes courage to live. You know, it's nothing weak about living. We've lied to people, you know, for so long, especially to our young black boys, that, you know, you ain't real if you ain't ready to die. You know what I'm saying? But I know from being in them cell blocks that a lot of guys that talk that talk, they're not built for that, you know? And so we have to just really think about, you know.
So in the fear of that, and the fear of dying, and the fear of what happened to you, and the anger and all of that, you wound up taking somebody's life. Yeah.
So I got into a conflict like 16 months later.
Was it that soon after?
It was that soon after.
Wow.
16 months later, about 2:00 in the morning. You know, drug transaction. A guy who I've been dealing with for a while, he had brought 2 people I didn't know, and I was like, you know, I don't do business like that. You know, you can't just bring random guys to my crib. That's not how we do business. And so we got into an argument, and the passenger who I had never seen this man, never spoke to him before. Like, we got into a real heated exchange, and I'm like, "Yo, get off the block." And so we went back and forth, and I had this moment when I turned to like walk and go in the house, and he opened the car door. When he opened the car door, it just triggered an automatic response, and I turned around and fired what turned out to be 4 fatal shots. And you know, I'm you know, I don't make excuses for my decision that night, but I want people to understand, like, there's an explanation as to why this stuff continues to happen in the hood. Like, you can't get shot and not get treatment, and then be in a situation like that where you feel threatened and not feel like, you know, it's him or me. You know, I didn't know what he had in the car. I wasn't trying to find out. That's the reality of what happens when you have post-traumatic stress disorder. Like, your ability to react to things is very different from somebody who's never been shot. And so, you know, when you look at the holistic aspect of how so many of us end up in those situations, then it shifts the thinking, you know, and if we can start offering treatment, like if a person gets shot or deals with any type of traumatic experience, like our community, specifically the hip hop community, we have to do a better job of saying, you know what, I think you should get some help, and I'm here to help you, because we don't deal with depression, we don't deal with mental illness, we don't deal with those things in a way that we need to in order to create a healthy community. If I'd have been little Timmy when I got shot, it would have been an outpouring of support in the burbs, like, hey, this shouldn't have happened to you. In the hood, it's normalized. Like, okay, well, that's par for the course. You got shot, you got locked up, you got a body. Oh, shit, you hit the trifecta. You know what I'm saying? That's the trifecta of hood street credibility.
Wow.
And we celebrate that nonsense.
And then you find yourself in prison for 19 years.
Right. Time you can't never get, I can never get that time back.
No.
You know?
And then one of the interesting things that Van said was that you did 7 years in solitary. And he said that, I don't know if this is true, but that people go insane after 90 days. Is that like a fact? Is that like
That's pretty much like the norm. Like, I think the scariest thing I've ever experienced in prison was watching somebody I knew have a mental breakdown in solitary confinement after like 30 days. Like, that's scary, because you're like, okay, when is it going to happen to me?
Oh,
like, when
because you can hear them, right, in the next cell?
Yeah, you know, when do I break? When do I reach a point to where I can't take one more day of this? And it's an insane environment. And the thing that a lot of people don't realize is the level of mental illness in solitary confinement is unbelievable. I mean, you think about Khalif Browder, who committed suicide last year after being in solitary for 2 years.
And if you don't know his story, I after this interview is over, I beg you to just do a little Google search and read his story. It's super touching. Yeah,
and I mean, it's just like, you know, when you think about that, and what I witnessed down there. So I did a total of 7 years, but I did 4.5 years straight. It's 23-hour lockdown, 5 days a week, 24 the other 2 days a week.
When I think of what I was doing 4 years ago, and if I could think, when you think about it in that way, like, what were you doing 4 years ago? Imagine if since that day to today, you were in solitary confinement in one cell with 1 hour a day that you get to go outside. And
a lot of times you forfeit that because the guys down there, they like throwing feces on each other when they get to the cages. And you don't want to go through that. Or like, you know, like one time I was out in the cage, they took us out in the winter. I was about to say let us out like we was animals, because that's how it feels. Like they let you out and unleash you. But I was out in the cage, and they just left us out there like longer than our allotted hour, and it was like ridiculously cold. Like, you know what I mean? And so they would play those games to discourage you from making them do their job. And that was the one moment where I felt that I was gonna like break. 'Cause it was like I was so cold to where I thought that I was gonna have like frostbite, you know. And I felt so powerless because I couldn't make them bring me in. I couldn't just walk out and go in the cages. And so, you know, that's what's happening throughout the country, though. You know, like if you talk to anybody who's been incarcerated,
that's awful.
You'll hear those stories, you know. And so, you know, I just say that to have those type of experiences and then expect somebody to come out here healthy and whole, it's just not realistic. You know what I'm saying? Like, you can't expect a person to be successful after that.
What do you think it is? How do you think you stayed sane?
Literature. Like, it's
Reading?
the reason that righting my wrongs is so personal to me. Reading Malcolm X's autobiography, Nelson Mandela, Shaka Senghor, those books kept me alive.
Yeah.
Like, whenever I find myself getting vulnerable or weak, I literally would just grab any one of those books and just open it up and just start reading. And I found solace in their pages, in their story, and their strength, you know. But had I not known what to expect, you know, that this is designed to break you. Like it's not designed to help you in any way. It's designed to literally break your spirit so that you won't stand up for yourself, so that you won't use your voice in a way that matters, you know. And it's designed to control you, you know, and it's happening like in ways that
when you put, I'm sorry to interrupt, but when you put it in context of like somebody like you, right, who's clearly well-read, and clearly spiritually grounded, and you were able to survive that. But when most people in those circumstances are not as well-read and not as spiritually grounded. And how do you survive that? How do you survive that? And then how do you come outside? How do you ever get out? And if you do get out, how are you supposed to have any type of life without any type of rehabilitation or any of that? I mean, where is the hope in that?
You know what? It's the scariest thing, and it's one of the reasons that I really want people in society to read this book, is I watch guys go home straight from solitary confinement. And I'm like, I wouldn't want that to be my neighbor. Not because this is a bad person, but because of what's happened to them. You know? And I'm like, they'll never be able to function in society as a healthy human being unless they get help. And we're not offering that. You know? And so the thing that politicians have done a great job at doing is they've marketed this lie to the American public that, you know, we're locking people up and throwing away the key, and that's just not the case. They're locking people up and then hiding the key until it's time to release them. And society is basically ignorant to the facts of what happens inside our prison system. I mean, the president was the first sitting president to go inside the president.
I mean, that was... I couldn't, that had me born like a baby when I saw that. Like, it was insane to see that.
But if you think about it, we have over 2 million people incarcerated. He's the first one to ever say, well, let me go look and see what's happening is on my watch, right?
Yeah.
And it's scary. You know, it's scary to think about, you know, that you literally have people housed in this volatile environment until their sentence is up and they say, okay, go home and adjust to society. Like, I came back to a different world.
You can't get a job.
Can't get a job, housing.
You can't. People don't want to rent you an apartment.
Right. They can legally discriminate against you when it comes to apartments.
Right. So where do you begin? So you come out of prison. Where do you begin how do you even begin?
I mean, for me, I was fortunate. I had a skill set, you know, and I had the wherewithal to start a company when I was inside. Started publishing books in prison. And, you know, I hustled books out the trunk of, you know, a car from the moment I got out, you know. So I was fortunate in that sense to have a skill set that offered me an opportunity to figure out my life. And I still ran into those obstacles. I needed like a real job when I got out, you know.
Yeah. Did you get one?
Eventually I got like contractual jobs and jobs I created for myself. Like every job I had up until now, I created for myself just through sheer determination. Like, you know, volunteering to do stuff, volunteering to write reviews for a paper, and then they ended up hiring me to write stories.
Oh, that's good. So you were always a writer?
No, you know, I discovered the gift, like, literally just through a friend of mine was working for the paper in the prison, and one day he asked me to write a story because he was like, you smart, you should be able to write a story. Right. And I was like, okay. So I wrote this story about my sister who had been, you know, I just come off a visit and found out she was addicted to crack. And so I went and wrote a story about, you know, what I felt about that and what I thought about it. And it didn't come out until like 2 months later. And I was leaving work and 2 guys were like approaching me and I'm like, we in a joint. So I'm like, yo, you know, like, what's up? Like, dog, why y'all like running up on me? Like, you know.
Right. What's the problem?
Yeah. And so the guy was like, man, I just want to give you a hug. He was like, I'm like, what is you talking about? You know, he was like, man, I just read that story you wrote. And he like, my mother going through the same thing.
Wow.
And when I went to work, my supervisor was reading and he just kept looking at me like, dude, did you like write this? And I'm like, yeah, I wrote it because I wasn't taking it. I'm like, this is just how I share my voice. You know, it wasn't like I was looking at it like, yo, I'm a writer.
Right, but then you realized you could touch people with your writing.
But then once I started writing, you know, I studied the best writers in the world. You know, I never went to journalism school, but I read Harlem Renaissance, right? I mean, like the best writers in the world. I've challenged myself on every level. And so I started off writing fiction. And I ended up righting my wrongs once I was home. And people kept asking me, so they like, I kept getting this, it's like, you're so smart and intelligent and articulate, how did you end up in prison? Like, you should have never been in prison. And then even my friends' mothers who knew me from the street, they're like, we never seen you doing anything wrong. You was always so respectful and mannerable. Like, how did you, out of everybody, end up with that much time? And I was like, they need to know the deeper stuff. They need to know about the child abuse and the neglect and stuff that they, didn't know about, and that's how I ended up writing that,
By the way, bestseller.
Man.
How amazing is that? After everything you've been through, to come out to write this book, to have a bestseller, to have Oprah Winfrey say it's like one of her best conversations in life.
Incredible. Like, I'm still taking it in.
I saw a post that she did where she gave it to like her whole crew.
Yeah.
She said, "I'm gonna give one to Stedman when he gets back from golf." Like, she had a picture on the gram of your book that she shared with everybody.
Yeah, that was like, my friends was just blowing me up. Like, yo, Oprah on her jet with posting pictures of your book. Like,
that's amazing.
It's crazy, but she's just a genuine soul. And I think the thing that blew my mind is after we did the interview, she said that up until we had that interview, she had never thought about how she saw men and women who were incarcerated. And she said after that, she never looks at people the same. She wonders who they were, who was the kid inside that experience. And I mean, when you can have her have an aha moment, like, that's mind-blowing, But New York Times best-selling author, it sounds awesome to me.
That's pretty good. You should get a tattoo that says it.
It's like crazy,
best-selling
right?
author.
Yeah.
You see me.
Yeah. And I mean, like, it's humbling. One of the things about writing.
Are you doing like readings at prisons?
You know what? I haven't done a reading at prison, but I've been able to go back inside and speak at prisons. I actually was spoken to prison, like right across from the prison I was in.
Wow. I was watching you on I think you were on like Good Day New York yesterday or the day before, and they were trying to corner you into saying, because what you did, because the crime that you committed, do you think you should have been in prison for that long?
Yeah.
Like, does the time fit the crime? And you kind of were like not comfortable answering that question, and I was wondering what the thought was.
Well, no, so the thing is, like, we push the idea that punishment in prison is the way that you resolve, with the problem. And I just don't believe that to be the case. I think there's a lot of different things that could have been done, maybe a combination of things that could have been done and should be done.
Like, if you had to say for yourself, what you should have done after taking that man's life, like what?
I think that if I was the judge, I would want to know what the whole picture is, not just a snapshot, not that just that 30-second decision. I would want to know what the whole picture is so I can determine what's going to produce the best possible outcomes for this young man. Is it going to be to lock him up for 20 years? I was 19. Yeah. Is it going to be to lock him up for 20 years with nothing and then just tell him to go home when his sentence is done?
Right.
Or do we say, okay, let's address those root causes that led to him being here and offer an alternative to long-term incarceration that adds value to society and to the community? And we just don't do that because it takes too much thinking. I visited several prisons in Germany in June, and nobody serves life in Germany. Nobody serves long, indeterminate sentences in Germany because they have a model that starts with the moment you get arrested, they're trying to figure out how do you re-socialize people back to society. And we just don't do that here, and we can. And they have the lowest recidivism rate. Crime rates are extremely low. And it's part of it because they see the men and women inside as still part of the community. Whereas here, we so used to othering people, right? Everything is an other. Those black people over there, the poor people, the gay people, the incarcerated. We have all these different labels to make people anything other than human. And they have a model that works because they acknowledge the humanity in everybody, and we just don't do that.
Wow. The one thing, though, too, that I wonder is, like, for somebody who's sitting in a prison right now or who's in solitary or doing 20 or 30 years, not everybody has that moment of, some people are so angry that, it's anger, so they do these crimes. They don't have that moment of, like, self awareness or self, you know what I mean? What was it that how did that happen for you? How did you realize like I did something terrible?
Yeah.
And I need to turn something around here.
It came in different ways. You know, I had great mentors in prison. You know, they're serving life sentences, and some of them unfortunately are dying in prison. But great mentors that challenged me to think, challenged me to look at things differently. But then I got a letter from my son while I was incarcerated, and
how old?
He was around 10 at the time, and his mother had told him while I was in prison. And when he wrote that letter, all that street toughness, all the prison toughness, all that came crumbling down, because here it was. I'm a father who was responsible for my child seeing me as a monster. And you can't be a man or a father and think that that's okay, you know? And so I knew that I had failed him. You know, I had left him out there vulnerable. And I was like, I can't allow my lasting legacy to be him seeing me as this monster. And I got to do what's necessary to turn my life around. You know, I owe that to him, you know?
What does he say now with everything that's happened? When he sees you on Oprah and he sees the bestseller list.
He's so non-phased.
Really? I mean, but he's got to be proud.
I mean, you know what I think he is in ways. He's 24 years old. He's had his own struggles. You know, it's a process. You know, you can't just come back out and start parenting. You can't just pick up after 20 years and be like, okay, I'm your daddy. Like, here's how it's supposed to go. So we've had our issues, and, you know, he's tested the waters a little bit, you know, to see if everything was real. And, but, you know, I think he's navigating his way through life, and I feel like my responsibility now is to just share my wisdom with him. You know, what he does with it is up to him. You know, one of the things that I'm a firm believer in is that you have to take all excuses off the table. So I don't allow him to use me being gone as an excuse whether he failed to succeed. At the end of the day, he has to make it happen, but I'm definitely there to provide the blueprint for how you make it happen.
Amazing. Thank you so much for today. Everybody, please go get this book. It is a bestseller for a reason. And the thing about it too, even if you've never been to prison, you know, people do fucked up shit all the time. Yeah. And I think your story, it just reminds you that the worst version of you could be flipped around.
No doubt about
Even
it.
if you did the worst thing ever, you could still change your life and still make a difference. I think that's like the most powerful thing. Message from the book.
I mean, I look at it like this, like the worst prison ever is the one we erect in our own minds. And I was locked up far before I was ever incarcerated, you know, because I had bought into the limitations of what my expected outcomes as a black male would be. Worst crime we can ever commit against ourselves. So this book is for everybody.
For everybody. Go get it. And last question, really quick. What can your average person do who's watching this, who's inspired and motivated? Where do you send them? Where do you advise them to help in terms of the criminal justice system?
So I advise them to first check out our work that we're doing at beyondprisons.org, which is really about humanizing the issue. But go to your local jails. Go to your local detention centers. Volunteer to go in and talk to the young men and women. They need that. I adopt a pod every year at my local youth home. I go in, I donate books. To the men and women incarcerated. But if you got a loved one, write them, because they need hope. You know, hope changes a lot. And we need to be more aware of what's happening in our prison system, because we're the ones paying the bill for it. So this is on all of us.
You're amazing, Shaka. Thank you so much. There it is. Righting my wrongs. Get a close up, Maria.
This was hot.
So good.